And welcome to HBYOB BrewCast for March 24th. And I am joined tonight by the owner of HBYOB, Joey Brumley, and an old fantasy football guy, but he's a beer brewer also. Chris, good evening.
What's happening, Mark? How are you doing?
Fine. We are here for episode about 14, right? On recipes. Is that about what we're at? Or
this is like part 4 or something like that?
Part 3, Joey's saying. All right. Because we talked about ingredients. We're going to jump right into it. No one cares about what we're drinking anymore. I want to end the recipe as far as ingredients by doing one quick thing. And I just wanted to discuss water and how water may or may not affect a recipe you're working on, and then we're going to get into brewing equipment and how it would affect. So that's really just going to be my first question. I'll ask Chris first. He's Mr. Complicates everything. So if anyone can complicate water and make it at least a 5-minute topic, it's going to be Chris. So Chris, give me your opinion on water. How will it affect your recipe?
That's the one part about brewing that I don't complicate, to be quite honest, because I didn't care about it enough. I like, for as long as I've been brewing, I would say I started caring about water chemistry within the last few years. And even then it's at the very basic, I care very little about it. I've gone from, I think the biggest step I've taken has gone from just taking the water straight out of the tap, and I now have an RO filter. That's as far as I've gone.
Gotcha.
Now, Joey and I both know folks that have basically done as much, gone into try and creating water profiles of the area that they want to try and brew at, match whatever they want to, and also tried to essentially create a Pepsi challenge of, well, I used this much magnesium sulfate in this one, I only put so much calcium chloride in this one, and tried to adjust it and make it like that. I never got that deep. As long as I
quickly
can
though,
what I want.
But based on what you just said, do you think those two things specifically would change the flavor enough that you would notice?
Not enough that I would notice. Not me personally. Joey might be a bit more sensitive to that, but
I'm going to ask him next, since he's the one trying to become a beer judge. Do you think you're good enough that you would know the water that was used maybe in brewing something, Joey?
So water chemistry can break down into many things, but two basic principles that I tell people. The first one is, especially if you're doing extract brewing, water chemistry becomes less important because the malting process took place from a factory that then dehydrated the water. So my general rule for most people brewing is, if you like the water you're drinking, go ahead and use it to brew. Now, when you start talking all grain brewing, water chemistry can kind of get broken into two things. One would just basically be the pH of the water. Mm-hmm. So basically, 5.2 is kind of the sweet, happy medium, what most people shoot for. What would happen if you went too high or too low? You basically would start to lose the efficiency of your grains, or your grains could become too efficient. And so your specialty grains would kind of ferment a little bit further out. So you wouldn't taste them. Or the other part of water chemistry would basically break down into, if you're wanting to do a German beer, you would want to use a water profile that would have been used in Germany. So, I joke all the time, people get so hung up on water chemistry. I joke all the time, you do know those breweries are just opening their spigot and putting it into their brew kettle.
Right.
Why are you working so hard to duplicate what that brewery's water profile is? But if you're entering competitions, now, can you taste any of those things in the final product? The only way I can taste them is, I want to make sure I get this right. Harder water is going to bring a little bit more of the hop, the lingering hop flavor on your palate, versus a softer water profile is going to be a little bit smoother of a hop profile. Mm-hmm. So if, Mark, you brewed a beer with your tap water that's extremely soft and mine is extremely hard, the beers would drink differently. Once again, we've said that before. Does it make your beer better than mine, worse than mine? It's back to, it is another level of fine tuning your final product.
Right.
Like I said, if you brewed that beer later, it's possible it would happen anyway. But that, without getting too in depth into water chemistry, because I'm probably one of, I've even said that to people. I'm still trying to perfect the malt, the hops, and the yeast. water's last on my list because I do feel like that is the last piece of the puzzle where you really are fine tuning your beer.
But as a percentage, it's the number one ingredient, right?
That's a percentage. Yeah, it's the number one percentage of most
everything
foods we eat,
right,
and it's not even
I know.
of the ingredients
of your body and all.
Of your body.
But the reason I say that though is I think that's the reason people go overboard on thinking it too much. Meaning they're like, well, I'm making 5 gallons of beer and 5 gallons of it is water, so I need to be concerned about it. But I agree with both of you. I'm spigot man. End of story.
It's back to, I think a lot of people, it's speculation because I don't know this to be fact, but a lot of people hear the importance of water chemistry, but I think most people overlook that's more of a pH thing than necessarily the gypsum, the calcium chloride, all those salts that you're adding to the water. pH is very important in brewing. I will quickly just say a lot of people, especially if you get on the internet, they're going to say, call your local city and get your water profile so you know what you're working with. Mm-hmm. Well, I called my city and they said, okay, well, you do know we have more than one tower, right? So you're going to need 5 water profiles, and then you're going to have to call us within an hour or so of when your brew day is, because we intermittently change all the. We don't
right.
wait till one goes empty to switch to number 2 and so forth and so on. We're constantly, so you would have to know 5 water profiles, and even on brew day, you're not going to know what's coming out of your tap because we're constantly changing them. So, like back to if you get on the internet, a lot of people are going to tell you to do that. But that's still not telling you what you're using on brew day.
Okay.
Now you can test the pH. You can simply test the pH, but as far as the chlorides and all the different salts and minerals,
you might never know that.
You're really not going to know. Yeah. But a lot of people will do, and I know a lot of people do because, especially where I used to live, there's a lot of chlorine in our water. It was just straight city water. Lots of chlorine in our water. A lot of breweries do get in the habit of filling their brew pot the day before and either pre-boiling their water, or they will add a Camden tablet to their brew pot with the lid off. The concept of that is the sodium metabisulfate is getting the chlorine out of the water. So in theory, your beer shouldn't taste bleachy. Like I said, I do know a lot of brewers who even are on my side of, I don't get too in depth with water brewing, do take the time to do that. And there is, I don't want to say there's a lot of science behind it. So many people do it. I would assume that they are tasting a difference, because back to I don't want to say most home brewers are lazy, but I don't think a lot of home brewers are going to add an extra process to their brew day if there isn't showing in their final product.
Right.
I do know a lot of people do that. So like I said, there's a lot of categories water chemistry can go into.
With 2 quick questions to end the water. One, at HBYOB, do you sell anything that will allow me to test or get any information about the water I'm using?
So we have pH meters, digital. We have pH strips. That's about as far as that goes.
I think I got one of those from you.
Look, I was actually counting because I was assuming you're going to ask me a different question. We sell water. I'm looking at like 20 blue water jugs back here. We sell just straight up RO water here at the store. So if
that is the next question. I just want to get an idea what the store has that could help someone make some of these decisions if they feel important. So you can test pH with some strips there. So then what is, tap versus distilled versus spring versus just bottled water?
So RO and distilled kind of fit in the same category. It's a different process, which is basically doing the same thing. It's stripping the water of absolutely everything. I've actually been told that RO and distilled water, if you just drink that straight, is actually not good for you because
no minerals.
It has nothing. It has nothing in it. And that's even, I won't even get into food, but that would, at its simplest aspect, that would be only if you are adding your own salts to water, use RO or distilled water. So if you're using Beersmith or a piece of software that is telling your mineral content, if you aren't doing that and say you're just wanting to mess with pH, I don't want to say like exclamation point, do not use RO water, because it could potentially cause your beer more harm, because back to there's no minerals or salts or anything in there. So your grains are going to have a much more, the internet will tell you it won't do anything in the starch conversion. I'm calling BS on that, but it will inhibit the mashing process from doing as well as it should. So if you're building your own water profile with the salts and everything, by all means use RO or distilled water. Spring water, filtered water, all the others kind of go in the same category. They're trying to get, a lot of the impurities out of the water and stuff. That's just to make it better tasting. Yeah. If you're doing extract or all grain brewing, by all means use those if the water you have at home does not taste well. Or I shouldn't say like well water, like no pun was meant there. If it doesn't taste the way you want it to taste, use spring water or just spring water or, or drinking water. And then if you don't mind the water you have at your house, by all means, you can use that.
Yeah, just based on for where you live. I mean, some folks, like I know in our neighborhood, we have like hard water. So it's, even though I was using like just straight like tap water for however many years, I think just switching to it, that bumped my efficiency up by just being able to change the water. So it's like making those minor changes can help, but it's just how much of a process. Like I think Joey hit the nail on the head. Like how much about your daily, or not daily, but your brew process do you want to change? Do you want to add in an extra step of either buying RO water, or I bought an RO filter off of Amazon, so I have to like pump the water in then like almost the night beforehand because it takes forever to collect. Like it takes like 5 hours to collect 5 gallons. So it's like, how much do you is the juice worth the squeeze to you?
Exactly. Gotcha. I agree.
All right. Well, before we move on then to equipment, just real quick, people that are listening, post something in chat, YouTube or Facebook, right? We still show the link then through Facebook.
And our new sponsor.
That's where I was going next. So, but that's the point. Questions, anything about what we're talking about, you can post them and we'll try to answer them. Chris, I'll let you go. We do have a sponsor of the show this week. Tell us a little bit about 2-Bit or 32-Bit.
Yeah, so 32-Bit, it's a company that I work with, hosted by like Hussein Shabazz at Who's the Prophet on Twitter, but also Marcus Grant is the content creator there. Other folks like Michael Florio, like anybody that follows the NFL or fantasy, the other world that I live in, they work at NFL Network, and a number of other great content creators that are there. I mean, Sheehan Arbot, great, Maddie Kroll, like a few other folks. So it's just being able to like talk about things that are interesting to us about the culture, whether it be about music, whether it be about movies, historical players, because I know Florio does a show about it's called Remember That Player, where he kind of dives into, I don't know, any sport, but just talking about a historical player that was big, like in that particular sport, but anything about things that interest us. And that's kind of how this whole company came together. And just being able to talk about the things that we're interested in, building a community, talking with other folks like us, like when we're in this little niche area of brewing. But whatever the subject matter might be, that's kind of how this whole thing came together. So if you're interested in brewing, you got us here. If you're interested in talking about music or pop culture, it's a vibe that's also on 32-Bit. You can talk to them about that. So it's just like, however you want to try and get involved. I mean, that's
how do you find their shows. How do we find their shows?
So on Twitter at 32. So the number 3030 TWOBIT. And then also we have a YouTube channel as well, 32-Bit. So check us out there.
All right, that's great. Let's move on to what we thought we would have done 2 shows ago.
6 weeks ago.
The actual equipment and how that can affect brewing. And specifically, I think we could narrow down every hardware topic into one whole show. But I guess what I'm looking for is, the cheap bucket system versus a mid-price, I'll say kind of a combo where you have some kind of a heat system or something that's more automated versus the higher end, fully automated systems. I'm going to start with Chris again, because I know what he uses to brew. When it comes to systems and what you brew, Chris, did you notice a huge difference when you went from the basics of, buckets and all that to bumping into a brew system?
Oh, absolutely. It was for the most part, it was 2 things. One being just the convenience factor. I'd done either extract, just like brewing in buckets for like 6, 7, 8 years, but being able to brew inside, like once it became like October, November, December, because normally like if it was past like October 31st, I wasn't brewing anymore. Like I'm shutting it down. I'll see you again around like March, April time frame.
Right.
But now I can do it, like I can literally do it in my office. So it just made that it allowed me to brew almost year round, or essentially whenever I wanted to.
Okay, I get that. I guess we're more interested in this series of how it affects the flavor / recipe
that's
versus.
What I'm gonna get to.
All right.
But being able to control, like, because we were talking about during the last show, like if you are supposed to mash at 154, 152, 156, or whatever. So being able to see it on the dial, like, hey, I'm setting my mash to 154, or whatever I need it, like whatever it says, like on my recipe.
More consistency.
Yes, exactly. So I'm not sitting there freaking out, wondering like, oh, is that the right temperature? Like, because normally when I was doing the brew in the buckets, I had the cooler. I was using the cooler method where you just like put everything in there, dump it, you shut the lid and you just let it sit. But if you don't know, I mean, some folks try, like I know that you could use the iodine test to see if like you actually have your starch conversion is complete, but that's been kind of debunked. But back then it was like, you could possibly use that as a way to figure out like if your mash is complete.
Right.
But if that's the only method you have to figure out, like if you're actually at the right temp and if you've converted all of your sugars, then what other method do you have, or what other recourse do you have other than opening the lid, checking the temperature, pouring more hot water in? I mean, so I think having an electric system allows you to bypass all that because you can just check the dial and have a consistent method each time that you brew.
Well, that's
Joey.
I think we're to kind of elaborate, and maybe you agree or disagree with me, Chris, because for years I thought like, oh, if you bought your way into the hobby, you made better beer. But I think what it actually is, and maybe only it was my case, the deeper I got in the hobby, the more I was willing to invest into the hobby. But along the way, I also got better at the hobby. So I would argue I could brew just as good a beer using the most rudimentary basic setup because I got better at brewing.
Yeah.
Because I've joked all the time, it seems like the longer I get into brewing, the worse my beers turn out for competition because I'm going so rogue these days.
Yeah.
But my point is like, I think with the learning curve, you're also investing into the hobby, which means if you would have went back to square one where you had your 5-gallon stock pot with an extract batch of beer where you threw 2 gallons of water in there, knowing what you know now, I bet you would be shocked at how close of the quality of beer would come out.
100%.
Everything you go through now.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Because like now it's like
wrong, but
yeah,
I just feel like, but what you said, which I think that you was totally correct on, is when you're new at the hobby, that time period of the learning curve becomes shorter because your brewing system is doing things that used to require so much additional effort.
Right.
That it's not making you, I don't want to say learn because you're still learning the knowledge, but it's not making you learn the hard way. Because I'm the type of person where it's like, I learn from my mistakes. Just throw me into it, and then I'll have better questions when I fail, and then I just get better from learning from my mistakes.
Yeah.
But like I said, as a experienced home brewer, I would say, if you go to any of the head brewers of any of the breweries around here and go, here's the most basic setup. Here's someone who's brewed 2 batches of beer. Here's the most expensive setup. I would venture to bet the head brewer is going to make better beer. But my point is but early on, that's what I tell people when people are interested in buying a brewing system. I always say, where are you at with the hobby? Because we're either adding on, but in the long run, if money's no object, and if you want to be here, you're going to start brewing good beer faster. And it's because it's taking, I don't want to use the word guesswork. It's like the Grainfather system. I always use that as a comparable. It's keeping your mash at the proper temperature. Mm-hmm. It's prompting you to do all of the steps. Now, granted, you still have to physically do those steps, but it's reminding you to do those steps. It's telling your mash water. It's telling you your strike water. It's keeping notes for you. I mean, it's doing so much. That's way more helpful than going to Home Depot and getting an igloo cooler and building a mash tun. And like you said, with the hot water and this, and it just complicates the brewing procedure, because brewing at its core is not hard. I mean, you take some hot water and mix it with grains and strain the grains away from it and bring it to a boil and
throw some hops on it.
Yeast. Yeah, I mean, brewing in its simplest form is pretty simple. What is it? I know we use a poker analogy. Takes you a minute to learn, a lifetime to master. That is kind of very true with brewing. I mean, it's I I tell people all the time, you can learn how to brew with one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that's front and back. That's all you need to know. I mean, and you can even learn as you're doing it while water's heating up on your stove. Brewing is that simple. Now, are you brewing competition ready beer? Probably not. But my point is,
it's the flavors and the consistency. Really, those are the two things that change more as you learn more.
And I think consistency is the biggest thing for when you start throwing, or not, it's not throwing, when you start investing money into your hobby. I think that's what you're technically buying. You're buying consistency along with, just more fine tuning. I tell people all the time, I have one of the more basic brewing systems out there because I hate to clean and I don't want to add time to my brew day. So I tell people all the time, if it doesn't make my brew day easier or my beer better, it's not part of my brewing system. Yeah. So there's a lot of customers that will go, here, check this out, check that. I'm like, that's really cool. Do you have one? I used to. I don't use anymore. My beer wasn't any better. Didn't save me any time. Of all things, I spent more time cleaning all that. That's why I don't use a conical fermenter that often. I don't like cleaning them. There's a million little pieces and parts to break down.
It looks cool though.
Looks
looks good.
I got to admit, when I had a conical fermenter and I'd bring people over to my house, like, wow, like that looks like a brewery. Cool. When I would show them my plastic
bucket.
food grade bucket, they're like, I ain't drinking that. So it's like perceived perception. But like I said, at the end of the day, the conical fermenter beer or the plastic bucket beer, I'm telling you, I don't think you're going to taste a difference. Now, if you want to get into yeast harvesting and all that, I mean, I'm not downplaying a conical fermenter. I think it has a lot of great applications. I'm just saying, because I'm not harvesting my yeast and blah, blah, and so many things, I don't want to spend 45 minutes cleaning the thing when I'm done with it, when I can clean my glass carboy out in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why I don't use one. Now, don't get me wrong. Some will argue like glass is breakable, slippery when it's wet. I get all of those things. Because I've heard so many horror stories of people dropping glass fermenters or sitting them down too hard because they're heavy, or they shock them because of the heat temperature. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying to buy glass and don't buy a conical. I'm just saying at the end product, I don't think you would taste a difference.
All right.
And a plastic bucket, when it's new, over time, when it starts getting scratched and scored and, odors start to retain, then you need to replace those.
Yeah.
Right. Then it's more of a cleaning or cleansing, or like I said, just being good enough to keep any things in your beer that you don't want there.
Grow a hop rhizome, which we should have here in the store here. We're not far away from rhizome time this year. So
I need to get some. I need to get one from you.
You said the grain father is a system. So does anything change going even to the higher end systems? Is it the same thing? Well, I know I'm talking $2,000 or $3,000 if you get into really some higher end things. Right. That's my point. Are you only doing that for consistency, more or less? Is that really the only advantage you might get going with real high end equipment?
Once you get past that, you start most of the time talking, I had someone complaining about a very expensive brew system today, and I won't name drop them because I have a thorn in my side with that particular company right now, but I would love to. But there's a lot of when you start getting past like your all-in-one, like Grainfather style systems, that's when you start talking like true 3-vessel systems. And there might be ones out there that are really expensive that try to keep you away from 3-vessel systems. But if you're wanting to get consistent, good quality beer, you're really kind of pigeonholed into getting a 3-vessel system. So then when you get there, now your cost goes up because you've got 3 brew pots instead of a Grainfather, 1 brew pot, and something to heat up sparge water, whether it's an old stock pot or whatever. Yeah. So that's where your cost is starting to come in there. Now, instead of just, like I said, instead of paying for 1 vessel, now you're paying for 3 vessels. Like I said, stay away from the 2-vessel systems. Especially if they're expensive, but the 3-vessel systems, then from that point forward, now back to getting your life easier. Spike sells their nano system. There's a door in the front. So when you have bigger batch sizes, you open it up and it's much easier to scoop your grains out of there instead of picking up some monstrosity of a kettle up and trying to just, I've been to breweries. I've done it where you're scooping, you're using a plastic shovel to scoop the grains out of the mash tun. Wouldn't it be so much easier if there was a door you could open up and just, ladle it out instead of getting on a ladder and scooping it into buckets? So once again, once your money starts to go more than like your Grainfather style systems, now you're starting to talk 3-vessel systems, which I think we just kind of said there's
Right. 3 times the cost.
3 times the cost because you got 3 vessels instead of 1. And then after that, as they continue to get more and more expensive, I'm going to talk spike because I just really like spike stuff. But you get the door for your mash, you get the steam condenser. It all sits on a pot. So again, when you're rinsing things out, it goes into a trough that drains into a drain. You know,
but again, still sounds more like a consistency / convenience. You're not a better beer.
You're saving your back is basically, and
not a better beer.
Because especially
it's not going to affect the recipe a whole lot.
No. That's like I said. I would not argue, but I would still stand beside that you can brew really, really good beer with a very basic setup. Okay. But there are a lot of people who have very elaborate setups, and it's back to I'm probably breaking my back a little bit more than them. But they've got, like I said, but then I argue they've got more parts to clean, so they're adding time to their day.
Theirs. Right.
And so it's subjective. It's back to it's. I always tell people start simple. Because let's expand from there, because brewing is different for everybody. It just is. I mean, some people really dive into the water chemistry. Me and Chris kind of talked about, we kind of brush over it a little bit. But to some people, they care a lot about it. Some people it's yeast. Some people it's equipment. The great thing about brewing is it's really simple, but everybody kind of has their own direction of what part of the hobby they enjoy. Right. Here recently, for the first time, because I know we talk about costs all the time, today was the first time since we've opened. I had a guy come and said, I'm back to brewing beer again because I'm sick of paying $15 for a 6-pack of beer now. He was like, the beer I drink all the time went from $9.99, $12.99, $13.99. And so he's back to, now that I'm paying $15, $16 for a 6-pack, I'm ready to start brewing again because I know I can brew a beer. Not identical, but very, very close to what I was drinking for a fraction of the cost. So as we get into all this stuff that's going on in the world, it was kind of weird because I started, and I know Mark started because of the money savings thing. It's kind of weird to see things kind of going full circle now.
Right.
People like I said, it was one person, but I'm starting to hear people, like, I shouldn't say people, because it was one person today for the first time. Like, you're getting back into the hobby for money saving.
Right.
And so I'm actually starting to gear the store up a little bit. I post something on Facebook this morning. I found a great deal on a bunch of brew pots. So I bought a bunch. So I wanted to pass on the savings. They're 4.5 gallon brew pots. So if you're wanting a sparge water, pot, or to get an extract pot for $20, a stainless steel, it's actually nice, solid stainless steel bottom. $20 for a 4.5 gallon pot's a pretty good deal.
That's a damn good
deal. So I'm kind of like, and I'm even seeing it even in the store here. People are going a little bit, I wouldn't use the word budget friendly, but people are, the direction of home brewing is changing again.
A little bit.
Looks like it's kind of going back a little bit to its grassroots a little bit of,
let's stay focused on recipe and what the beer is going to taste like. Now, Joey, you as the owner of HBYOB and dealing with a lot of equipment, I guess I'm more interested now in the little pieces of equipment that you do think affect recipes. So what equipment would you say, okay, instead of going cheap or expensive, this will definitely help or make your beer a little bit better or taste better? That's kind of what we're looking at in this series we've been talking about, is affecting the actual flavor and or the taste profile of the beer. What equipment would you either not cheap out on or make sure you definitely would use that you think affects the quality of the recipe, that we're going to end up with? I mean, and for instance, let me say a plastic spoon versus stainless steel spoon versus a wood spoon. Do you think it's going to change my flavor profile at all? No. Or are there people that think that?
No. Well, in the good old days, yeah, I won't get into that, but
all right.
To answer your question, I would say the number one thing is back to, I had another customer today who said, I don't want to say he said he got back into brewing to save money, but he's just said, I'm ready to start brewing more often, but I don't have time to all grain brew. So I'm gonna do some extract brews. And the one tip, which is the answer to your question, I would tell people is, even if you want to do extract brewing, try to buy a vessel, try to do a full volume boil. I would say that's probably the number one thing. Okay. Back to even our, and I won't deny, our extract brewing kit comes with a 5-gallon pot, which is not big enough to do a full volume boil. Even though it makes 5 gallons, you need headspace. I mean, most people,
you got to add water afterwards.
But I would say the best piece of advice I would give people is your actual boiling vessel. I don't want to say don't go cheap on it. but make sure you have the capacity to do a full volume boil. Whether it's on a propane burner, it's electric, whether it's on your kitchen stove, try to find a pot that will accommodate a full volume boil. And then
which is usually 6 or 7 gallons, right? Is what you really want.
I would say 8 as a minimum.
Yeah.
An 8's the minimum. Okay.
Yeah, I would say 8 would be the minimum, because if I'll break it down real simple. To do a 5-gallon batch, you're going to have to start off with at least 6 gallons, because you're going to lose close to a gallon through the 1 hour boil. And we all know, anyone who's brewed beer before has probably heard the scorching sound. So you'll need about a gallon or 2 for headspace, because just like when you make macaroni on the stove, it foams up when it's coming to its initial boil. So I would say 8 gallons, because 8-gallon pot, that means to the brim, meaning 8.1 gallons is spilling all over the place.
Yeah.
So I try to tell people 8 gallons, and we sell an 8-gallon pot here in the store. So I would say that's kind of your bare bones minimum size pot. I would say if there's anything, and I sold one today, it was like, I think our 8-gallon pot's like $55.
Okay.
And we sell the Digiboil, which is $199, and that's electric. So my point would be, there's anything there. So there's different price tiers of that, but the best piece of advice I would say is, even if you want to brew extract beers, because I would say try to do full volume boils. Yes, you can get away with doing less, but I would say that's the biggest thing that I can tell the difference of. We talked water chemistry. I don't think I can taste those beer differences. Of all things, I think I can taste the salts sometimes in people who do water profiles. Like, I really think I can, but that's me being a hater. But I would say, just being honest, because I don't want to embrace the change. Okay, but I'm just being honest. I don't want to embrace the change. But the one thing I would say is, if you, Chris, brewed a full volume boil extract beer, and I brewed the exact same beer, but I used the 2.5 gallons of starting water like the recipe called for, your beer will drink better than mine. And I would bet good money that I can taste a difference almost immediately. Like, almost immediately. Your hop utilized differently, the sugars caramelize a little, concentrate heavier. That homebrew tang that I've seen on forums and people have talked about in the store, I think that's I personally think that's one of the biggest contributing factors. And I would take, like I said, I would put my money where my mouth is. I think I could taste the difference. So if there's anything to not skimp on, I would say get a good's the wrong term. Get a big enough brew pot to do a full volume boil. Yeah. Like I said, I would even argue, because there's a huge debate. I used aluminum brew pot. I had a 10-gallon aluminum brew pot I used for
I
years.
have one of those. Yeah.
And if you get online, people are going to slam you up and down, and you're going to make the worst beer ever. I would still say you're better off buying a cheap aluminum brew pot than a small stainless steel brew pot.
Well, that holds the 8 gallons, you're saying.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
So even if you have to go cheaper on the pot, get the pot that's the right size.
The problem entails, though, at 8 gallons or more on a kitchen stove, it's either too tall for your overhead, light air duct, or it's so wide the heating element doesn't really give it a good chance to heat up. Right. So I get it. If you're brewing extract beer on your kitchen stove, I get it. I totally get it. So that's the reason why we offer those pots. But I do think there's a flavor difference. I do stand behind that.
Well, again, we're going long, but there still might be other little equipment things. But Chris, let me go to the next question. Let's kind of keep it quick. Right. Bottling homebrew versus kegging homebrew. Do you think that affects the flavor and the outcome of your beer?
To a certain degree, because it depends on if you've added the right amount of sugars, like to the bottles, in order to make sure that they're carbonated correctly. I think I know at least one of the books, I think it might be Palmer's book. I forget, it may or may not be. But they do have like one of those conversion charts that tells you, if you're aiming for so many volumes of CO2, this is how much sugar you're supposed to add in order to get to that right carbonation level, like depending on the style of beer that you're brewing. And some folks either follow that chart, other folks that don't, and you're just kind of winging it. That can kind of change like the mouthfeel like of the beer itself, and essentially like how you perceive that beer. So for me personally, ever since I switched to kegging, it's become easier for me to control that, because you have your regulator. Like, you know how you're going to be carbonating your beer and what pressure your beer is going to be at, just based off of the dial that you have on your regulator. So I personally prefer kegging, just because, again, when we were talking about earlier about using electric systems versus brewing in a bucket, the consistency factor. I can look at the dial on the regulator, and if I want it at 10 psi, 12 psi, or if I'm force carbing and I just want to completely, just let it rip for about a minute or so, I know what the pressure is going to be at. So it's easier for me to control like what that is going to, or like how I'm going to perceive the beer, like when I first drink it, if I wind up kegging it.
Right, because the carbonation does affect the carbonation does affect the appeal of the beer anyway.
Yeah,
maybe not the flavor.
I
Joey, what about you?
The kegging, the difference between the kegging and the bottling and the final product is you'll have more final product if you keg because you'll brew more frequently. Because every single home brewer has to agree.
I would agree. I would agree. Yeah, so I would agree.
I would say it's back to control. I can't tell you how many. Here's the problem: when you keg, whether you overcarbonate or undercarbonate, you have complete and total control. You can fix both, and I can teach you how to fix both. With bottling, once you put that cap on it,
you can't do anything.
The first one, 9 times out of 10 is going to be the same one as the last one. Right. So I can't tell you people will come in here and go, I got 50 beers bottled that are flat. What do I do? And I try to help them. But a lot of times the advice is, well, drink a lot of flat beer. Or the opposite, even worse, because actually flat, I can help. Every bottle I open gushes.
It blows up.
You just made a bunch of cannons.
There's like this much left after it all's done gushing. That I can't do a damn thing to help you out with.
I know somebody might make fun. I had a 5-gallon flat one time, and you know what? I'll be honest, it make fun. The way I made it unflat is a 24-ounce mug, and I poured 12 ounces of Budweiser in there, and then 12 ounces of. You know what? Hey, that's a black and tan. That's how they. I mean, I'm just saying, Chris.
Real thing.
You don't hear about those anymore.
But Chris, it made it drinkable. What I'm saying is the Budweiser is so unflavored that it added really carbonation and a little substance to the beer. Obviously, it changed it. I'm just telling you, I wasn't going to throw away the beer, and
you do what you got to do, man.
I comboed it, baby. I comboed. I had 10 gallons of beer that way. And,
you do what you got to do, man.
5 gallons of it was Budweiser.
My point is, and I think most home brewers will agree, forget the money the money, the amount of time you invested into that beer with your brew day, the fermentation, the anticipation. Cleaning. The last thing you want to do is open one up to go to your friends and it pours out like water. We're like,
yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, flat beer is terrible. And I'm not sure which is worse, flat beer or beer so freaking carbonated you can't even drink a drink without just the bite of the carbonation. But that's my point is kegging will kind of get you away from that. Does your beer turn out better? But I can't tell me people come in here that aren't homebrewers that are getting kegerators. There is something satisfying about draft beer. I don't know what it is.
I prefer
very gratifying about draft beer. Is it better, same, or worse? I don't know. But at a homebrew scale, it definitely seems to. It's back to it. It takes a lot of the anxiety out of the brewing process, knowing no matter what, I've got complete control to pivot however I need to.
I would go cheaper. I would go cheaper on system if it meant I could afford a system and a kegging system.
I would 100% agree with that statement. 100%.
And
I would seriously, if money was an object, I would go back to brewing extract beer if I could keg it versus the most elaborate all grain system that I had to bottle.
Yeah.
Period.
I
if I was stuck on a deserted island and I can only take so many things, kegging would
kegging equipment would be one.
Like, I'll figure out the brewing part secondary. I better be able to keg this shit and have CO2.
Man, remember when I used to come over to your house and just like anytime we'd be done playing cards or whatever, I'd be like, "Hey, give me your bottles. I got a bottle in a couple of days."
Yeah, we've all collected bottles.
I had a close friend of the family who owned a bar, and I asked him for a bunch of bottles. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'll save my bottles." I wasn't thinking about it. I had a whole cargo van full of twist top bottles, and I was like,
that's the problem.
I didn't think about the question full circle. I forgot most people drink Bud Light.
Well, I think what we figured out anyway is that obviously ingredients are by far the most important of a specific recipe. The recipe itself is going to make a difference. The equipment, there's advantages, but a lot of it is more of a convenience and consistency thing more than affect the recipe. But I think we are ready then for our next show in a couple of weeks to really now come up with a recipe, which will be we will finally next show.
All right.
Truly sit down and start with certain ingredients and maybe a concept of what kind of beer we want and, come up with a recipe. Yeah,
we already talked about this.
I'm hoping we get a few people that want to make it so that we can then test the equipment part too. Meaning,
I kind of have an idea. I'll bring in a recipe that is my recipe, and hopefully I'll try to find the recipe that inspired it. And I would love to see how close it even is to the original. It's probably completely, totally different from what I started with, or it might be damn close.
Well, you two are going to be. I'm the one that's going to have the ideas, and you guys are going to tell me what ingredients is going to get us as close to what the concept we're looking for. So that's where we're going to go. Chris, I'll let you go first. Tell us how and where to find you.
You can find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. All of my fantasy stuff, see like the various sites, but then also this show will be now part of 32-Bit, so you'll be able to see us on YouTube there too. That's
great. Joey, you any information on the store, hours, contact, website?
Everything's pretty much same thing. If you got any questions, give me a call. Email me if you got your recipes. We're getting into the spring, so the weekends with grain bills have been kind of busy. So if you'd like to place it ahead of time on the website, we have a recipe builder part on our website. It's the first category. So you don't have to do it, but kind of save you a little bit of time on the weekend if you have to wait for a grain bill to get crushed up. So try to use that option if you'd like. Other than that, thank you 32-Bit for sponsoring us. Hopefully you'll be able to watch our podcast here soon.
All right, everybody say good night.
Good night.